Imagine a graveyard of ships in the middle of a scorching desert, rusty fishing trawlers standing hundreds of kilometers from the nearest water. This is not a set from a science fiction movie. This is the reality of the Aral Sea. Once the fourth largest body of water on the planet, turned into a toxic desert in just a few decades. How humanity managed to destroy an entire sea for the sake of cotton. Subscribe to the channel and let's figure this out together. The middle of the 20th century. The Soviet Union is building communism and needs currency. A lot of currency. And what can provide currency? That's right, cotton. White gold, as party officials called it. And so the planners' eyes turned to Central Asia, where the climate is ideal for growing this crop. The Aral Sea in those times was a true miracle of nature, an area of more than 68,000 square kilometers, depth up to 68 meters. 34 species of fish lived here. Dozens of fish processing plants operated. Port cities thrived. Local residents had been fishing for centuries. The sea fed hundreds of thousands of people. The coast was an oasis of life, surrounded by the Karakum and Kizilkum deserts. Humid climate, rich nature, unique ecosystem. It seemed this would last forever. But in Moscow, they were already drawing up grandiose plans. Millions of tons of cotton needed annually, and cotton needs water. A lot of water, and this water flows in two great rivers of Central Asia that feed into the Aral. The Amu Darya and Sir Darya, two arteries feeding the sea for millennia. The Amu Darya carried its waters from the Pamir Mountains and the Sir Darya from the Tian Shan. Together, they brought about 60 cubic kilometers of water into the Aral every year. In 1954, a plan was approved that would change the fate of the region forever. Construction of the Karakum Canal, the longest irrigation canal in the world. 1,300 kilometers along which water from the Amu Darya was supposed to irrigate the cotton fields of Turkmenistan. Soviet engineers worked with incredible enthusiasm. Thousands of excavators, hundreds of thousands of workers. The construction project of the century. The canal was laid through the desert without much thought about the consequences. The main thing was to complete the plan on time. And then the construction of dozens more irrigation systems began. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, everyone wanted their share of the water pie. They also began actively taking water from the Sir Darya. By the beginning of the 60s, the scale of irrigation had become truly grandiose. Only these canals had one small problem. They were built hastily, without proper waterproofing. According to official data, 50 to 70% of the water was lost on the way to the fields. It seeped into the sand, evaporated, went nowhere. Imagine, more than half of the water stolen from the sea didn't even reach the cotton fields. This was colossal, monstrous inefficiency. But the planned economy didn't care much about this. The main thing was that the numbers in the reports looked good. And so, in 1960, something happened that should have been a warning bell. The level of the Aral Sea began to fall. At first slowly, literally centimeters per year. Local fishermen weren't panicking yet. But scientists sounded the alarm even then. Hydrologists warned of catastrophic consequences. They wrote reports, conducted studies, spoke at conferences. Their voices drowned in the general chorus about the victories of socialist agriculture. Moreover, some party leaders openly said that the Aral Sea was a mistake of nature. They said, "Why do we need this puddle in the middle of the desert when we can grow cotton and feed the country's textile industry?" By the 70s, the rate of shallowing accelerated. The sea retreated faster and faster. Every year, the water level dropped by 20, 30, and then 50 centimeters. This was an ecological catastrophe in slow motion. Port cities began turning into desert settlements. Fishing trawlers could no longer go out to sea. The water had retreated kilometers from the docks. Fish processing plants closed one after another. People lost their jobs. The city of Moynock was once a thriving fishing port. The largest fish processing plant operated here, providing a sixth of all USSR catches. Thousands of tons of fish annually. And now, Moynock stands 150 kilometers from the water. A new desert formed on the site of the former seabed. It was called Aralcum, meaning Aral Sands. 40,000 square kilometers of salt marshes and toxic dust. That's larger than the entire area of Switzerland. And what about cotton? Oh, cotton grew wonderfully. The Soviet Union became the second largest cotton exporter in the world. Uzbekistan produced millions of tons of white gold. Indicators grew, plans were overfulfilled, bosses received awards. But at what cost? Growing 1 kilogram of cotton requires 10 to 20,000 liters of water. That's a bathtub full of water for every t-shirt. The scale of consumption was astronomical. By the 80s, the situation became critical. The sea split into two parts, the Greater Aral and Lesser Aral. Water salinity tripled. Fish began dying en masse. Of 34 species, only 6 survived. The region's climate began changing catastrophically fast. The sea could no longer moderate temperatures. Winters became colder, summers hotter. Temperature amplitude rose to critical values. Air humidity dropped many times over. But the worst began when the bottom was exposed. For decades, pesticides and fertilizers from cotton fields washed into the sea. Tons of toxic chemicals settled on the bottom. And now, all this turned into toxic dust. Salt and dust storms became a real disaster for the region. Winds lift millions of tons of poisoned dust and carry it thousands of kilometers. This dust was found even in Greenland glaciers. Can you imagine the scale? The local population faced an epidemic of diseases: throat cancer, lung cancer, tuberculosis, anemia, kidney diseases. Child mortality in the region increased 5-fold. This is not statistics. These are real human tragedies. The concentration of salt in the air became so high that metal structures deteriorated many times faster than normal. Paint peeled off houses literally within a year. People couldn't breathe normally during storms. And remember the pesticides? Among them was the infamous DDT, a poison banned worldwide. It was used on cotton fields for decades. Now it hung in the air that millions of people breathed. In 1989, the water level had already dropped 14 meters. The sea lost 60% of its area and 80% of its volume. Salinity increased almost tenfold compared to ocean water. The ship graveyard in Moynock became a symbol of the catastrophe. Dozens of rusty trawlers stand in the middle of the desert like monuments to human stupidity. Tourists come to photograph themselves against this apocalyptic landscape. After the collapse of the USSR, the situation did not improve. On the contrary, the new independent republics began pumping water even more actively for their needs. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, everyone wanted to develop agriculture. International organizations sounded the alarm. The UN called the drying of the Aral one of the largest ecological catastrophes of the 20th century. Conferences were held, grants allocated, rescue plans built, but it was already too late. Kazakhstan tried to save at least the Lesser Aral. In 2005, they built the Kokoral Dam, which separated the northern part of the sea. The project cost $85 million, but it worked. The level of the lesser Aral began to rise. Fish returned. Local residents could fish again. This was a small victory in a great tragedy, but the greater Aral continued to die. By 2014, the eastern part of the greater Aral completely dried up. For the first time in 600 years, it disappeared from the map. Satellite images showed only cracked earth instead of water. This was the end of an entire era. Scientists calculated that restoring the sea to its original level would require completely stopping irrigation for 5 decades. This is impossible. The region depends on agriculture. Millions of people live off it. The cotton economy became a curse for the region. Monoculture depleted the soils, poisoned the water, destroyed the ecosystem. But abandoning it is impossible. Too much is tied to this industry. Interesting fact, scientists discovered traces of ancient settlements on the dried seabed. It turned out the Aral had already dried up in the past, about 1,000 years ago. But then it was a natural cycle stretched over centuries. Now the sea disappeared in just 50 years. This is an instant by geological standards. Man accelerated the natural process hundreds of times, turning gradual change into catastrophe. Attempts at greening the dried bottom showed some results. They planted saxaul, saltwort, other plants capable of surviving in salt marshes. This helps stabilize the soil and reduce dust storms. But this is a drop in the bucket, or rather, in the former sea. Uzbekistan is trying to diversify agriculture, reduce the share of cotton. But this is a slow process. A system built over decades doesn't change in one day. People don't know what to replace their familiar source of income with. The salinity of the remaining water reached 100 grams per liter. For comparison, in the ocean, it's about 35 grams. This is practically brine, a saturated salt solution. Only the hardiest organisms can survive in such conditions. New species adapted to extreme conditions appeared. Artemia salina, a tiny crustacean, became the dominant species. It can live even in very salty water, but the diversity of life disappeared forever. The history of the Aral became a warning for the entire world. Similar problems began arising at Lake Chad in Africa, which is also rapidly shallowing. The Dead Sea in the Middle East loses water every year. It turns out people don't learn from others' mistakes. Around the world, the mindless exploitation of water resources continues. Rivers are dammed, lakes drained for irrigation, groundwater pumped faster than it replenishes. The economic damage from the catastrophe is estimated at tens of billions of dollars. The fishing industry was lost, the tourism industry destroyed, population health deteriorated, agricultural lands degraded. The social consequences are also enormous. Entire cities turned into ghost towns. Young people leave in search of work, only the elderly remain. The traditional way of life is destroyed. The culture of coastal peoples is dying along with the sea. Local residents tell that before you could hear seagull cries for many kilometers. Now there is oppressive silence. Only wind chases dust across the former bottom. This is the silence of dead land where life once thrived. Old-timers remember how in summer the whole family went to the sea to relax. Clean water, sandy beaches, fresh fish for dinner. Children swam until sunset, adults sunbathed. This seems like a fairy tale to current generations who grew up among the sands. In Moynock schools, there is a museum dedicated to the sea. Old photographs, fishing nets, canned goods from the local factory are stored there. Tour guides tell children about what they will never see, about a sea that no longer exists. Technically, restoring the Aral is possible. Irrigation needs to be drastically reduced. irrigation systems modernized, transition to drip irrigation. But this requires tens of billions of dollars and the political will of 5 countries. Conflicts over water between Central Asian countries intensify every year. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan control the sources of rivers and want to build hydroelectric plants. Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan need water for irrigation. Kazakhstan is trying to save its part of the sea. Each country pulls the blanket over itself. There is no unified strategy, no agreement, no political will for compromise. And the sea, meanwhile, continues to dry up. Time passes, and every year the situation gets worse. Climate change aggravates the problem. Glaciers in the mountains feeding the rivers are melting faster due to global warming. At first there is more water, but then the glaciers will disappear, and there will be no water at all. Scientists predict that in 30 to 40 years, the region's mountain glaciers will melt by 70%. This means a catastrophic reduction in river flow. Water problems will become even more acute. Conflicts could escalate into wars. Some experts propose radical solutions. For example, digging a canal from the Caspian Sea or even from the Arctic Ocean. These are fantastic, expensive, and ecologically questionable projects. But desperation breeds bold ideas. Another option is to completely abandon cotton and switch to less water-intensive crops. Grow cereals, fruits, vegetables, develop livestock farming. But this means a complete restructuring of the economy, which is unrealistic in the short term. The tragedy of the Aral showed that nature cannot be conquered with impunity. The Soviet slogan that man must dominate nature led to catastrophe. Nature always takes its due, it's just a matter of time. This is a lesson for all humanity. We live in a closed ecosystem of the planet. Disrupting the balance in one place, we create problems everywhere. The drying of the Aral affected the climate of all Central Asia and even beyond. Dust from the Aral bottom is found in ice samples from Antarctica. Imagine how far the consequences spread. A seemingly local problem becomes global. Borders don't stop ecological catastrophes. So we have seen how one of the greatest lakes on the planet turned into a toxic desert in just half a century. How the pursuit of profit and plan fulfillment led to the death of an entire ecosystem. How millions of people pay with their health for others' ambitions. The Aral catastrophe became a symbol of the ecological madness of the 20th century and a reminder that nature does not forgive recklessness. Subscribe to the channel, hit like, and write in the comments whether you knew about this tragedy. Do you think it's still possible to save the Aral Sea, or is it doomed? Share your thoughts. Let's discuss this important topic together.